this study suggests that workplace respect and managerial support impact organizational identification. And this study kind of comes out of social exchange theory, which is a kind of reciprocation theory that maintains that in any type of relationship, when one person positively affects a relationship, the other tends to reciprocate positively. And so what this study is looking at is kind of that idea, that theory within the workplace in relation to an employee feeling workplace respect and managerial support, and how they, by feeling that, reciprocate by identifying with the organization as a whole. And so the questions here are whether trust and job satisfaction mediate a positive relationship between workplace respect as well as managerial support and organizational identification. And the methods here were a series of surveys that were distributed to 450 full-time faculty members in Lahore City, Pakistan, 293 which were usable. And this was there were 3 surveys essentially given over time. The first consisted of questions about workplace respect and managerial support. After 10 days, the second survey was sent, asking participants to refer to a colleague who could provide their level of interpersonal trust and job satisfaction. And then 10 days later, the third survey was sent regarding organizational identification. And the workplace respect, managerial support, trust, job satisfaction, organizational identification, and the control variables were all measured through scales and items verified through past research.
No, real quick, when the second survey, it says to provide their level of participants to refer to a colleague to provide their level of what does that mean? They're are they rating their colleagues' perceived trust?
That was my interpretation. This is what the study. This is the sentence that the study uses. So I wasn't totally sure, but that was my. I couldn't tell if it was asking them to refer to themselves as since they're referring to a colleague. If the colleague is rating the person referring them.
I would think that it was I would expect that it was they were rating their own job satisfaction, and they were rating their own interpersonal trust with some colleague that they've identified.
Yeah.
That's the only way that it would make sense, right? I mean,
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's got to be it. Okay.
Cool. Yeah. And so you can go to the next slide. The results of this were that they showed that workplace respect is positively related to organizational identification when trust and job satisfaction mediate this relationship. And this essentially means that employees who feel respected at work also feel more able to trust employees, leadership in the organization as a whole. This trust can lead to then job satisfaction, which then increases their organizational identification. So the more respected employees feel at work, the more trust and job satisfaction they feel, leading to their organizational identification. And they found that if the mediators of trust and job satisfaction are not present, this positive relationship is not significant. So it doesn't exist in the same way. And interestingly enough, on the variable of managerial supports, they found a positive relationship between managerial support and organizational identification. But this positive relationship didn't rely on the mediators of trust and job satisfaction. So with these mediators and without them, there's still a positive relationship between managerial supports and organizational identification. And so what we kind of can take from this is and this is kind of what I deduced is, one reason that workplace conflict can lead to negative things like higher employee turnover is that employees do not feel respected or supported in conflict, which in turn prohibits positive identification with the organization and may influence them to leave. So when working with organizations, consultants should consider investigating the level of respect and support that employees feel, as discovering this could lead to establishing better leadership practices that better support and show respect towards employees. And yeah, that's a brief overview.
Yeah, interesting. Workplace respect. Well, I mean, one thing that stood out to me. I mean, this is an interesting finding that for respect to lead to identification with the organization, the a feeling of trust and job satisfaction have to be present, but it doesn't have to be present if you're getting support from a manager. You can also feel very identified with the organization, even if you're not very satisfied with your job. You can still feel identified. So that's interesting. And I just wonder if too, because it said they were using the interpersonal trust measure was like identifying a particular colleague. And if that colleague wasn't the manager, if it was someone else, then I could see why that variable just didn't play a role in the relationship between managerial support and or identification.
That's a good point, and I didn't think about that, but you're right.
I would, I mean, assuming we're thinking about that correctly, assuming that that's what they did.
Yeah.
Respect, trust, managerial support. These are all sort of, best practices we all know. But sort of the end goal for this study was organizational identification. How closely do you identify with the organization? And you could see that if you don't identify closely with it, it could lead to like turnover. And it's like, it's pretty easy for me to take off and get out of this organization if I get like a better job or a better offer for money or something like that, because I don't really identify with the organization.
Yeah. Positive identification leads to a lot of different benefits that they mentioned a little bit here, but so it's important. There's another study they cited here too that past study, or this study's shown that employees who feel respected by those who create positive experiences for them in their organization often reciprocate with increased gratitude and thankfulness towards the organization. So this idea of reciprocation, you do one thing for me, I am going to respond well in return, and through this increased trust and job satisfaction.
They seem like pretty important variables to measure in organizations. I think that a lot of employee surveys measure on some level respect and hopefully trust, certainly managerial support. I don't know how many actually measure organizational identification. It's probably an important one to measure if they don't.
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about that organizational identification and how, when I know that this study didn't necessarily look at this, but without the respect component and just having that, like the opposite, basically, when someone is very passionate about their work and thoroughly kind of identify with the organization, but yet don't receive, like that person does not receive respect or anything from managerial figures, what happens there? I'm thinking of just some of the work that we've done, and I've seen that. And so I'm just curious, like, I guess that just adds the component of, well, you need to build trust. So then how do we work at building trust? We, engage in dialogue and things like that. So
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, you measure this stuff, and then it's like, okay, so we see where the hot spots are. Now, how do we improve it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so this kind of research is really important, where it's like we're looking at like the psychological components that are kind of linking together, but then also the other stuff that kind of we did earlier, which is like, how do interventions work? And then you plug those two things together. A nice, well-informed approach to improving culture.